If you want to become good at playing pool, this right here is the right video. We're gonna talk about the different bridge hands you need, how to hold a pool stick, the stance and the aiming line, how to build a perfect pool stroke, how to shoot every single ball step by step. You're gonna learn the ghost ball aiming system and how to aim with side spin. Then we're gonna introduce cue ball control. After that, we're gonna break and run a rack of 8 ball with speed control. And at the end, I'm gonna show you 5 common pool shots that amateurs get wrong. So let's start, enjoy. The most important thing when forming a bridge, no matter what kind of bridge you're using, is to be able to have a solid guide for your cue to move the cue backwards and forwards along the aiming line. So let's start with the simplest bridge first, which is the open bridge. So eventually it will look like this, and you can see you have a very stable and nice guide for the cue. So how do you form the open bridge? Well, it's actually very simple. All we need to do is start with our hand flat on the table, just like that. Now what you're trying to do is to bring your index finger all the way to the thumb and your thumb all the way to the index finger until you have that nice V shape you're seeing here. And in the best case, this V shape, this line you can see, is guiding perfectly along the aiming line. But what happens if you want to hit low on the cue ball? Well, you just try to flatten the whole thing until everything is resting perfectly on the table. And the nice thing is, if you now want to hit high on the cue ball, you can see all you need to do is to raise your fingers up, and now you're able to play a follow shot. And of course, if there is an open bridge, there is also a closed bridge that will eventually look like this. Looks tricky, but is actually very simple to form. So what do you do? Once again, put your hand flat on the table. Now you want to just bring your index finger up, and the cue already comes from the side and rests on your thumb. And now you're just one step away, because what you want to do now is bring your index finger and thumb together like this. Looks tricky? Let's do it once again. Index finger goes up, cue comes in, and now of course all the other fingers move together with the index finger, and you just bring that index finger to here. Now it's not perfect, I like to straighten it out a bit, and now I have a very, very stable and solid bridge on the table. Now if you're still a beginner with the closed bridge, you might want to actually do it all the time like this when you're down on the table, but what you can also do is form that bridge already in the air. I like to have it like this. You can see middle finger and thumb come out like this, then I push everything together, and then I can rest it nicely on the table. And of course, one thing that might help you, if you have your hand or your wrist too far over here, then the cue won't really smoothly glide through your fingers, because of course you have so much skin there. What you can do is bring your wrist over to here, and now there is less skin in the way, and the cue will be much smoother going through that gap compared to having it like this, where you can see it sticks to my hand a bit. But what happens if you want to hit high on the cue ball now? Well, you could try to lift the whole thing up like this. It works, but you can see it's a bit wiggly. So what we can do instead now is do the same pose, but just bring your ring finger in like this, then repeat the whole step. You can see goes together, and now you have the advantage that with your ring finger, you can see you can lift the whole thing up, and you have that very, very solid foundation for your whole bridge. Now this is a very tricky spot, because the open bridge doesn't help. The closed bridge doesn't really help here, because you have somehow to cue over that 8 ball and you want to have it stable, remember? So how do we do that? Well, it's very easy once again. Form the foundation. Now, instead of just bringing your index finger in, you bring your middle and index finger in. Then you form the open bridge. And now what you can do is, if you're resting your cue now, you can see those 2 fingers will help you to lift the whole thing up. And once again, you're very, very stable, and it's very easy to cue over the 8 ball like that. Now, if the 8 ball would be even closer to the ball, you have to elevate even more. But it's once again the same principle. Both those fingers go in, you form the open bridge, then you raise the whole thing up, and now just the index finger helps to stabilize the whole thing again, and you have that kind of V shape just with your thumb here. So just bring your thumb all the way over here, and now you still have that V shape. you can elevate, and it's very, very stable. Sometimes the cue ball is also close to the rail, so of course you don't have enough space to form your bridges like here. I mean, of course you could do it, but you don't want to be so close. You want to be able to nicely go back and forth with the cue stick. So what do we do when we have to form our bridge on the rail? Well, in that situation, the easiest one you can do is start with your reference position once again. And now all you need to do is put your cue to here, and now just bring your thumb and your index finger together, and you can see you have that nice guide where you can go forwards and backwards on the aiming line. This is super easy, but a super powerful technique. What else could you do? Well, remember our V shape we had before to stabilize the whole bridging? Well, we could do the same now. So form this position with your hand, which should be very common. And now what you can do is just push your hand towards here so you can actually stabilize your hand. You can see with that. Now form an open bridge, and once again you have a nice V shape and a super stable bridge. My favorite bridge when we're close to the rail, however, is the closed bridge, which will look like this, and it's very powerful and super easy to form. So all you need to do is align your cue on that aiming line. Then your hand goes onto the table like this, and you just bring your thumb parallel to the cue. Now the problem is you can already cue, but the cue is able to go to the left. So to prevent that, bring your index finger up, bring your middle finger also in line with your thumb, and then just bring the index finger up like this. And now you have a guide on both sides, and you can see if you tighten it up, the cue has absolutely no chance to go to the left or to the right. The nice thing is you can move it backwards like this. If you want to move it even further backwards, you just bring your thumb down and just use the index finger and the middle finger as a guide like this. You can see now you can cue nicely. And let's say the cue ball is a bit further away. Of course, this would be too long of a bridge. Now what you can do is do the same, go forward and just grab with your hand onto the rail. And now you still have the same kind of bridge, just a tiny bit of a variation where you're closer to the ball. If the cue ball is now very, very close to the rail, of course, now we would be once again, if we're doing it that way too close. If we want to go back, well, we can't rest our hand here. So what else could we do? Well, you can form an open bridge that we formed in the beginning, this one, and just bring it all the way back and use the middle finger and the index finger to stabilize it like that. And you can see now you're very far away, and you can once again go back and forth nicely with that open bridge you're having. One little extra tip, you can also use a pool glove, because this obviously will help to make the cue go smoother through your bridges, especially the closed bridge, because some people have very sweaty hands like I do, so I always play with that glove. And of course the skin on your hand also on the closed bridge sometimes makes it difficult for the cue to glide nicely through your hands. And if you watch this video till the end, I just want to say you made a very important step here, because the bridges are really the foundation of your game. And I know people who are playing for like 20, 30, 40 years and they still struggle, or they don't even know that they're struggling, but they're still forming really bad bridges. And of course, if the foundation is bad, if your bridges are bad, all the other stuff will definitely suffer from that. So working on your bridges is very, very important. And you can also do that if you're not having a pool table at home. I told the story a million times. I used to practice my bridges on the kitchen table at home when I didn't have this nice setup. So this is a nice way to practice, especially the closed bridge. I really struggled with that for a long time, but it's such a powerful one. Alright, besides a solid bridge hand, it's also important to know how to hold the cue stick properly. Let me show you how you have to hold your cue when you're playing pool. Very often when I'm at my local pool hall, I see way too many beginners holding the cue, for example, like that. This is of course not how you do it. And also a very common mistake is they're holding it right, but then they're putting their thumb actually onto the top of the cue, and this is also not how you do it. So let me show you how it's done. First of all, how many fingers should you actually use to hold the cue? Well, it depends on personal preference. You can just hold it with 2 fingers, maybe 3, 4 and even 5 fingers. It depends. Even a lot of professional players are doing it differently. I, for example, like to use my whole hand and just hold it like this. Very important, don't grip it too tight, because if you're gripping it too tight, you're actually disturbing the forwards and backwards motion, which has to be straight. So hold it loosely in your hand. Also very important, the wrist placement. If the wrist is all the way to the outside, then you also can't shoot straight or cue straight. The same with the inside. So your wrist is just a passive part of your body, hangs down and swings around. So don't tighten up, hold it very loosely and just use it as a passive part. Also, when you're going back, for example, your hands or fingers open a bit just that the cue can swing freely. That's also very important. And apart from this, where exactly do you need to hold the cue? Do you need to hold it here, 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 or here? Well, all of this depends on your bridging length. So I have set up this shot. Now let's imagine this is my bridge. Very important, if the tip of your cue is right in front of the cue ball when you're doing your pre-shot swings, then you need to have that 90-degree angle here. Your arm has to be perpendicular to the table. So, for example, there are a lot of players or beginners, I have to say, are holding it all the way at the back, and then it looks something like this. This is of course not how it should look, because that way you are hitting the cue ball before the maximum speed of the cue is reached. Also, don't hold it too far at the front, because your cue will have decelerated before it even reached the cue ball. Now, the big thing is what happens if I adjust my bridge length. Now I'm going to use a longer bridging length, and you can see now I don't have that 90-degree angle anymore. So if I have a really long bridging length, then I have to put the cue or grab the cue a bit more at the back. For example, like this, you can see this long bridge length. I have to hold my cue all the way at the back. Now I'm going really close to the cue ball with my bridge. You can see now I'm not holding it at the back, I'm actually holding it here in the front. So depending on how far away you are, you have to adjust. And now let me finally show you how this should look. And we're going down, this is my bridge length. I try to feel it, I'm not always perfectly 90 degrees. Then doing my pre-strokes, opening my wrist when I'm going back. All of this is very loose. And this is how you have to hold your cue in pool. Knowing those two things is the foundation, but now we're talking about how to stand properly and how to find the aiming line. Have you ever wondered how pro players are just so consistent when it comes to shot making? The secret? Every single one of them uses the same approach when shooting. They all align them perfectly to the so-called aiming line. But how can you find it? And most important, how do you align yourself to become a consistent shot maker? You can find the aiming line by visualizing a straight line from the heart of the pocket to the object ball. Then extend the line and just connect it to the center of the ghost ball. And here's the magic, no matter where the cue ball is positioned, the aim remains the same, just directed at the center of the ghost ball. Finding the aiming line isn't that difficult, but after that it's all about the proper body alignment. So the first step is to extend the aiming line all the way to the floor, and now you have to align your dominant foot on the aiming line. I'm a left-handed player, so I'm aligning my left foot on the aiming line. Of course, if you're a right-handed player, then you're going to align your right foot on the aiming line. So it's very important to align yourself properly, because for example, if I'm stepping next to the aiming line and then I'm trying to go down, you can see now I'm in a really awkward position. I don't have room for the cue. So in order to have room, I would need to make a step all the way to the side. And of course, this is not how you stand in pool. So very important, align yourself on that aiming line. It doesn't have to be exactly that part of your foot. It can vary, it's personal preference. So what you could do as a beginner is actually align your cue on that aiming line, and then if you actually look over your cue, you should have the aiming line exactly underneath your cue. Now the big question is, what do you do with your right foot? Well, very important, you don't step to the front, because as you can see now again, you don't have really room for your cue to move nicely, so this is not how you do it. And as you can see, my foot and my hip is in the way, but now if I'm taking a step to the side, you can actually see now I have room for cueing. The only thing you don't want to do is step too far to the side, because now as you can see, the cue is on the baseline, your wrist is on the baseline, but now your elbow isn't on that baseline anymore. And it's very important that your elbow also is on the baseline, because that way you can assure that you're actually cueing as straight as possible on that aiming line. So you don't have to step exactly like this or like this. This is personal preference. For example, I like to step just like this, very natural, not perfectly to the side, just in this direction, and this is my personal feel-good stance. Now, one more thing is, where exactly should you step on that baseline? If you're that close to the ball, then as you can see, this is not what you want to do, because now you're very, very close to the ball. No, what you should do, the rule is, your arm should be extended. So as you can see, if I'm, for example, like this away, now my right arm is all the way extended, and this is how you should do it. Okay, now let's try to shoot that ball. Again, I'm stepping on that baseline, I'm trying to visualize the straight line, very important. All the aiming happens when you're standing, when you're aligning yourself. So, for example, tiny movements like this can actually make a difference. So very often you will see me, when I'm having a long, difficult shot, standing here, aligning my left foot until I have a feeling that it's perfectly aligned. Okay, now I think I have the perfect alignment, I have the perfect distance to the cue ball. Now all I'm doing is stepping to the side. I can already do it like this. If you're still a beginner, you can do it like this and go down, but I don't like to do this. So I'm stepping onto the baseline, taking a step to the side, going down. You can see my arm is all the way extended. Now everything should be aligned on the baseline. The cue, my eyes and my foot, the wrist and my elbow should be perfectly aligned with the aiming line. Now just cue straight along that aiming line, and that way you should be able to make the 9 ball. Well, this is a straight-in shot. This is very easy to find the aiming line. But what happens if you have a shot with an angle? Well, you align yourself again on that straight line. Then you bring your cue over the cue ball. Very important, the tip stays at the ghost ball. Bring your cue back until it's in line with the ghost ball, and then try to never leave that line and just shoot into that direction. But obviously you need a good stroke for that, so let's have a look at the perfect pool stroke. So I'm standing while I'm aiming, and now the whole process starts. You're going down. What I like to do is locking into the shot, seeing if everything's alright. Once I'm feeling comfortable, starting my strokes, seeing if everything is aligned correctly. Once I'm ready, I'm going to pull back really smooth. Maybe you can pause a bit, you don't have to. And then I'm going to push the cue just straight forward and going to follow through. Okay, I'm going to do this without talking now. Your task is to just concentrate on my stroke. Watch how I am locking in, how smooth my swings are, how I'm making my final pass, a very relaxed backswing and a nice follow through the cue ball. Going back to the stroke, here you can see how far I'm pulling my cue back and how much I'm following through the cue ball. And I'm doing this to get the best possible timing. This means I'm accelerating just a tiny bit through the cue ball so that the tip hits the cue ball just a fraction before the cue is traveling at its highest speed. The better your timing is, the more rotation you can get into the cue ball without increasing the speed of the shot. This shot, for example, was executed with perfect timing. If I'm playing it with the same spin and power but with bad timing, you can clearly see how much less rotation the cue ball actually got. But it's not only the key to getting a lot of rotation with little effort. Decelerating before even making contact with the cue ball will very often make you miss the shot. Just imagine a person throwing something and not releasing it when their arm is moving at its highest speed. It just doesn't make any sense. It's an unnatural movement that is most of the time caused by nerves and uncertainty when shooting. Have a look what happens if you're decelerating when shooting. The cue ball has a total different reaction, and because of that we're missing the shot. And now let's get back to our exercise. Very nice angle on the 9 ball. So again, go down, lock in, just trust that everything is aligned correctly, and then just cue straight, follow through nicely. And the most important thing, after you made the shot, subscribe to this channel. Which angle did we get? Well, we didn't get the right angle, but this doesn't matter. We can now work again on our stroke. We want to draw back now, get fairly straight on the 10 ball. And this is a really good example again for a nice and smooth stroke with a lot of quality and cue action and the right timing, of course. So you don't have to hit that hard if you're playing the shot, and if you want to draw back, just watch now how smoothly I can draw the cue ball back without doing this really hard kind of stroke that a lot of people are doing. Now again, just watch my stroke. We need a lot of cue action. We don't want to hit hard because we don't want the cue ball to run into the free ball. So we have to follow nicely through the cue ball, but this is not always the case. If the object ball and the cue ball are very close together like they are here, you definitely want to shorten your bridge length. It would make no sense to be really far away because that way you will lose a lot of control. So whenever the cue ball and the object ball are very close to each other, then you also want to shorten your bridging length. And here in this case, for example, we also don't need a lot of action on the cue ball. We just want to stun over them. So we also, besides the short bridging length, we don't want to pull back all the way and we don't want to follow through until here. No, we don't need to move the cue ball a lot. We don't need a lot of action or speed on the cue ball. That's why on shots like this, we're using a short bridge length, just doing tiny pre-strokes or tiny backswings. Then all we do is just follow through a tiny bit. So whenever you don't need a lot of action, keep everything very short and compact. Very nice on the 10 ball. We got a bit of an angle because it's important to be close to straight that we can get on the right side of the free ball again. This time I want you to concentrate on how I'm holding the cue. Hold it not too tight even on your final stroke. Otherwise it can harm your accuracy in terms of hitting the right spot on the cue ball, which can lead to not getting the desired cue ball action and even missing the shot. Even got a bit too much out of the cue ball, but this is just fine as long as we're having the right angle. Again, on the 11 ball, I want to be somewhere here. And I don't have to go around the balls. And aiming, going down, locking in. And when you're holding your cue, make sure that your wrist is not bent to the left or to the right. No, it's just a passive part of your body hangs down and you're holding the cue loosely in your hand. Let's judge the speed a bit here. And this is the perfect time to talk about how your stroke can impact your speed control. As you can see here, we definitely need a bit of more action on the cue ball because we want to stun over, maybe use a touch of left spin and bring the cue ball towards here. So in this case, having that short bridge length and those tiny strokes wouldn't be ideal. So in this case, I'm going back a bit further up. I'm doing a bit bigger backswing, and also I'm going to follow through a bit more. Not maximum, we're far away from maximum because we don't want to bring the cue ball all around the table, a couple of rails. So here I'm resting my bridge hand on the table. You can see those are my backswings. Now just concentrate on how far I'm actually going back with the cue. It's not that far, something like that. And I'm also not going to follow through maximum amount. And now let's get back to our drill. But it doesn't matter, now we're on the wrong side, now we actually have to go around 2 rails. But keep in mind, the outside spin will make the cue ball gain some speed off the rails. If we get the right angle, well, it's okay. We did, this is the straight line. Here would be nice, but this is still okay. Now we can do a bit with the cue ball. And the most important thing before going down, know what kind of spin you want to add, the speed you're going to use and how the stroke should feel. And then regardless of the outcome, just make sure to exactly stroke it the way you've imagined. Cue ball should come 2 rails, center of the table. And then once you've visualized everything, very important, then you prepare. So while I'm doing my pre-strokes in the air, I'm most of the time visualizing everything, just really starting to feel the shot, how the shot should look and feel in your arm, the speed and so on. Okay, I'm preparing. You just watch what I'm doing. And what I'm going to tell you in a second is probably the most basic advice, but at the same time, the most difficult to implement into your game. And when you're down and you just don't have the feeling that everything's right, then stand up, jog again, and restart the whole process. So far we concentrated on the cue, but now concentrate on my body and how much I'm moving while shooting the shot. Did you notice that it just became a bit blurry? This is because I froze the image just before shooting and overlaid the image. As you can see, I didn't move a lot, and this is very important when shooting. Try to stay as still as possible and only move your arm. Okay, center of the table. Again, we didn't end ideal because this is the straight line In the ideal world, we would be here, where we just can stun one rail towards the 5 ball. But again, not everything goes as planned. Now we just have to follow one rail. And also a very common question is, should you drop your elbow or not? Well, it depends on the amount of cue action you need. If you want to rewind the whole video and just watch my elbow all the time, there is no right or wrong here. With just a bit of left spin, we could have stayed a bit further away from the rail here. So again, just going to hit the high ball, going one rail or maybe 2 rails if I'm adding a touch of right spin, but I don't want to do that. Just going one rail towards the 13 ball. And again, don't overpower the shot, just rely on cueing straight and following through nicely. This time just concentrate on the final backwards and forwards motion just before I pull the trigger. I didn't make a pause, but the transition between backwards and forwards motion was very smooth, and that's very important because I've probably said it 100 times on this channel. All the cue action comes from the forward motion. So make a pause or don't make a pause, as long as it's smooth, it's okay, but you don't want to rush the shots because then your muscles maybe tighten up and you will jump up or choke on the shot. You see, I'm always staying down that long even without my GoPro, because if I'm staying down after the shot and I notice that my cue or is pointing this or that way after the shot, I know, okay, I had some technical issues. So that's very important. Stay down and just feel in which position your body is. And this will very often indicate that something was wrong. So now we have a really good foundation, but what do you actually do when you approach a shot? Here is my 10-step process. Shooting balls is what pool obviously is all about, but it's not as simple as just going down and pulling the trigger. Today I will show you my personal step-by-step process that you can do on every shot, no matter how easy or difficult it is. Today I will show you my 10 steps that I do before every shot. The steps are divided into 3 categories: thinking, preparing and executing. And yes, 10 steps seem to be a lot, but don't be afraid. Your personal skill level and the difficulty of the shot will change the time you need to spend for every shot by quite a lot. So you could either spend a whole minute for a very difficult shot to go through every step, but also just 5 seconds on a simpler shot. Okay, I will do all the 10 steps one time very slowly and explain everything very detailed, and then we're going to do it faster in my usual rhythm. Check the angle. We're not checking the angle to already know where to aim, but to know what is possible with the cue ball. With a straight in shot, for example, we can move the cue ball only on this line without cheating the pocket. However, with an angle like this, we can basically get the cue ball everywhere on the table. Check where the next 2 balls are on the table. Here we want to know where the 7 ball and also the 8 ball is, because we want a nice angle to get from the 7 to the 8. If the cue ball would end here, we would have an easy shot on the 7 ball, that's true, but the 9 ball is a blocker and we would really have a hard time getting down table for the 8. Pick your point on the table. Considering the position of the 7 and the 8 ball, we're picking this point on the table so that we can easily go towards the 8 ball. Look for the best path to get there. If we check the tangent line, we will see that the cue ball will almost travel towards our point on the table. So we know that it's possible to go to this path with the cue ball, and this leads to the next step. Figure out where you have to hit the cue ball. We know the path we want to go, now we need to figure out where we have to hit the cue ball. By adding low on the cue ball, we can change the path like this. And if we then just add a tip of left hand English, the angle will open on the first rail and bring us towards our point. Okay, now we did all the thinking. That means we know where we want to end with the cue ball, which path it should travel and where we need to hit the cue ball. Now we start to prepare the shot. The first thing we do is step behind the aiming line, or the so-called baseline. This is already part of the aiming process. We aim while standing, not while down at the shot. So we're stepping behind the aiming line and put our left foot, because I'm a lefty, on the baseline. Now our arm, our head, the cue and foot are already on the right line. Visualize and feel the shot. Our brain doesn't understand words but images. That's why we have to visualize how the object ball drops and also the cue ball's path. This is a very important step because our muscle memory, brain and body will try to reproduce those pictures we just visualized. Preparing and feeling the shot is something I do simultaneously while visualizing. I do my pre-strokes in the air until I feel ready for the shot. It sounds very abstract, but it's very important. One part of feeling the shot is, for example, to figure out at what speed we will hit the cue ball. And this is not something theoretical like, I have to hit at speed 1.5 to exactly get there. No, it's to already feel the speed in your arm and how the whole shot will look and feel. Okay, after we prepared the shot, that means we're feeling ready, we're finally going to execute the shot. First we step into the shot. Remember, my left foot, my left arm, my head and cue are still on the baseline. And now we just step into the shot and never leave that line. And now we're locking in. Before doing any pre-strokes, we will stay down for a short time. This is one part of checking that everything is aligned correctly so far. It helps to see if we're on the right point on the cue ball, if our body position, stance, arm and so on is feeling right. If we're doing the pre-strokes while going down, we can check this properly. Of course it works as well, but I really improved by locking in first. Okay, we're still locked in. And now we do the pre-strokes. We do those to check if we're moving the cue straight and if the contact point, aiming and the whole setup is still correct. It's like warming up. And if everything feels right, move your cue backwards, pass and shoot. It's not necessary to do a pass, but what is important that we have a smooth and controlled backswing. Because the backswing has nothing to do with the shooting motion. All the energy comes from the forward stroke. If we're pulling our arm back really fast, the muscles tend to tighten up and we will lose accuracy. As you see here, even my thumb moves uncontrolled, the cue jumps up and wiggles if I do it really fast. If I'm doing a smooth backswing however, everything is way more controlled. And now let's put the GoPro on and try to clear this rack. Okay, here I'm preparing the shot. I have visualized everything, I did everything that we just talked about and I'm trying to get the cue ball into our desired position. As you see, I'm staying down for a very long time. This is something I do because I want to show you the cue ball as long as possible with the GoPro, but it's also important to not jump up on shots. Here we got the perfect angle on the 7 ball and we're trying to go 2 rails. As you see the path that I'm pointing on the table. So we visualized our path, I already know where I have to hit the cue ball. Here I'm preparing, I'm going down, you see I'm locking in. If I'm feeling ready, I'm doing my pre-strokes. Then I'm pushing the cue back. Yeah, it was a little fast, but still okay. And we got a nice position on the 8 ball. And here it's the same process again. I know where I want to end for the 9 ball. I know already what angle I have on the 8 ball and the path that I'm going is this path. 1 rail or maybe even 2 rails. Now I'm preparing, I know where I have to hit the cue ball, yeah, high with a touch of right in English. And then I'm preparing, stepping into the shot, I'm locking in, I'm doing the same on every shot and as you see it is really fast. And my usual rhythm is even faster, yeah, I'm just slowing down a little bit here. But you can do, as I said, all those 10 steps in a very short time. Here we didn't end up perfectly on the 9 ball, we're a little close to the rail, so a little less right in English would have been perfect. But yeah, still very doable and we ran this rack. Okay, those were my personal 10 steps that I do before every shot. And as mentioned, I'm doing every step, but the time I need for each step depends a lot on the difficulty of the shot and also your personal skill level, experience and your quick-wittedness. I, for example, know really fast where I have to be on the next ball and how I get there. But beginners, for example, will need more time. And that's just fine, with experience you will get faster. Alright, knowing all of this is of course important, but the big question is how do you actually aim the shots? When I was still a beginner at pool and I was facing that type of shot, for example, I made the same mistake that I would say 99% of beginners are making. I tried to make the ball and I missed it to full. And then for example, when I had even more angle, so I had a cut like that here, and I was trying to make the shot, then what happened? was I missed the ball even more. And I'm sure this is the biggest problem for beginners when they're trying to aim shots in pool. And this is why I'm gonna show you exactly how you have to aim, how to find the contact point, and how you have to adjust. So first of all, let's talk about the actual contact point on the object ball. Where does the cue ball need to make contact on that ball to make the ball into the heart of the pocket? So it's very, very simple actually. So you want to make the ball into the center of the pocket. So the point on the object ball we're looking is the point that is furthest away from the pocket. So imagine center of the pocket, the point that is furthest away from the pocket is this one right here. And if the cue ball makes contact with that point, as you can see, the ball should go exactly into the heart of the pocket. Let's imagine we want to shoot the object ball for whatever reason to that diamond here. All we're looking for is the point on the object ball that is furthest away from the diamond. And of course, it's not that point, it's not that point. You can see we have a round object, we have that sphere here. So this right here is the point that is furthest away. So if the cue ball makes contact with that point, then the object ball is gonna go to here. But we want to shoot it into the pocket, of course. So on a straight-in shot, this is very, very simple. We're just trying to hit it full in the face. Wasn't hit full in the face, was a bit to the right, but we still were able to make the ball into the pocket. Now, a very common problem, as I just stated, is whenever we're getting an angle. Because what happens now if we're trying to make the ball and we're still looking for the point that is furthest away from the pocket, which is this point right here. So we're focusing that point. We're trying to shoot to that point, and we're gonna miss the ball once again to full. So let me show you what happens with the ghost ball here. This is not a video on ghost ball aiming system, but the ghost ball is just a reference. So whenever we're making contact with the point that is furthest away, this is where the cue ball needs to hit. And if you're coming from a straight line, you can see the cue ball is gonna be exactly at the same position as the ghost ball is. But what happens if we're having more angle? You can see if we're now aiming not to this ball here, but if we're aiming to the point that is furthest away, you can see all of a sudden we're aiming a bit too far on the left. You can see in the best case, if we're aiming to the right spot, the cue ball should be exactly in line with the ghost ball, but that's not the case because we're hitting a bit too far on the left. Now what happens if we're using more angle? Remember, here is the point that is furthest away. So once again, we're trying to aim to that point and we're hitting the ball even more on the left to our ghost ball. And of course, the bigger the angle gets, once again, here is the point, and we're completely missing. And this is why in that case, if we're shooting to that point, we're gonna completely miss the ball, obviously. So why is that? Well, what you need to understand is you don't wanna shoot the center of the cue ball to that point because we have this 3D object, we have that sphere. And if you're trying to shoot the center of the cue ball to that point, to that outside point, you can see what happens is, before the center reaches that point, the outside of the cue ball is gonna make contact with that point, and this is why you're always hitting that ball to full. And of course, the closer to straight you are, the more you can aim the center, or here in that case, you can aim the center to that point because it doesn't matter, it's on the same line. So what do you need to adjust? Well, long story short, the more angle you're having and you're looking for the outside or the point that is furthest away, you can't just shoot to that point, you have to go a tiny bit to the right in that case, and you're gonna make the ball. Now, if you're having more angle, you're trying to find the point, which would look like that, where it's too full, and now you go a bit more to the right, and once again, you're able to make the shot. So the reference or the basic rule is, the more angle you're facing, the more you have to adjust your aim and go to the right. And this is just a general rule. Where exactly you need to aim or how much you have to go to the right is something you need to understand on your own. The only thing I can advise is I'm always, when I'm standing behind the shot and I'm looking for the point that is furthest away, which is this point right here, I'm trying to visualize the whole cue ball as a 3D object. So I'm trying to have that in my mind, that image, when I'm going down to see which part of the cue ball is gonna make contact with the point that is furthest away from the pocket, which is our contact point. So I'm just trying to understand how big the cue ball is and what part of the cue ball is gonna make contact with that point. And this is why so many beginners miss those kind of shots, and I always hit it too full. And of course, the more you practice, the more you give this a try yourself at the table, the better you will understand. And at one point, you don't even have to think about it anymore. I hope that helped. So this was how you aim without side spin. But of course, if you want to control the cue ball, you need to use side spin. So let's talk about how you have to adjust your aim. How do you aim with side spin? This is one of the most asked questions in pool. And usually when I'm doing those kind of videos, I'm explaining all the theory and all the physics. But in this video, I'm just going to explain the things you need to know. And after watching this video, you will exactly know how you have to adjust when using side spin. But very important, what you have to understand first of all is how you have to aim when you're using no side spin on a cue ball. And this is where the ghost ball becomes very, very handy. Just imagine a straight line from the ball you're trying to make to the heart of the pocket. If you just extend that line and put a ball frozen to that ball you want to make, you just aim to the center of the ghost ball, because what happens? The cue ball will travel to the center of the ghost ball. It will hit the ball right here, and of course then the ball goes into the heart of the pocket. Before I'm going to show you how to aim with side spin, let me show you real quick that the ghost ball method actually works in this case. So I'm trying to aim to the ghost ball, and I make the ball into the heart of the pocket. But now the big question is, what happens when you're using side spin? Let's use left spin in that case and hit the ball very, very soft and just aim to the ghost ball point once again and just observe what happens. This is very important. This is how you learn. Just observe what happens. So you can see I'm aiming to the ghost ball point, I'm using left spin, and I'm hitting soft. And all of a sudden, I'm missing the ball. And this is what you have to understand. The cue ball will always make a curve to the side where you add the spin on the cue ball. This means if you're using left spin, the cue ball will make a curve to the left because your cue is always a tiny bit elevated. And the more you elevate it, as you can see, the more you're curving and you completely miss the shot. So this is what you have to understand. When you're using left spin and you're hitting soft, the cue ball will curve to the left. This means it will leave your aiming line to the left. This just means you have to aim just a bit more to the right. This is everything you need to remember. So let's not aim to the ghost ball point, which would be this line, but aim a bit more to the right because we're using left spin and we're hitting soft. Let's give it a try and aim more to the right. Usually I would miss that ball, but because of the left spin, I'm able to make that ball. This is really, really important. And of course, if you're using right spin, you have to aim a bit more to the left. Very, very important. So let's do that. Also, going to use right spin, and instead of aiming to the ghost ball point, I'm going to aim a bit more to the left. So you can see I'm using right spin, I'm aiming more to the left, and the cue ball will curve back on track, hopefully. So as you can see, we would have needed to adjust even more to the left. So all you need to remember is, if you're using spin and you're hitting soft, on left spin, you need to aim a bit more to the right. On right spin, you need to aim a bit more to the left. So it's always vice versa. But what happens if we now hit a whole lot harder on the cue ball? Let's try to aim to our usual ghost ball point, where we're able to make the ball without any spin into the heart of the pocket, and use left spin and hit really, really hard. Let's see what happens. Left spin, ghost ball aiming point, and a really hard hit. I missed the ball to the other side. So why is that? Why did I miss the ball now to the other side? Well, the reason for that is something called deflection. And deflection is something that's basically very logical, because if you're using left spin, and I'm going to show you how this would look in slow motion, if you're using left spin, you can see the cue ball will deflect inevitably to the right, because there is something on the left, and even though you're pushing straight forward, the left spin will make the cue ball deflect to the right. Of course, not that much, because this is exaggerated and very, very slow. So, what does this mean? How do I need to adjust my aiming when the cue ball on a hard shot with left spin deflects to the right? How do I have to adjust? Well, let me show you real quick. I'm using left spin and I'm aiming a bit more to the left because the cue ball will deviate back to the right. All you have to remember, if you're hitting hard and you're using left spin, then you have to aim a bit more to the left. And if you're using right spin, you have to aim a bit more to the right. One thing you have to understand though is that the amount you have to adjust really differs depending on the cue you're using. I'm, for example, using a carbon fiber shaft by J Flowers. This is the SMO shaft. It really doesn't have a whole lot of deflection. This is why I just need to adjust my aim a tiny bit. If you're using a house cue that is in your local pool hall, then you basically sometimes even have to aim to completely miss the shot because it deflects just so much. So this is very important. The deflection changes with the cue you're using. So let's play the same shot with right spin and really hard. Where do we need to adjust? Well, we just have to aim a bit more to the right, because remember, we're hitting hard with right spin. This means we have to aim a bit more to the right. So let's aim basically straight on the shot, and the cue ball will just deflect a bit to the left. And once again, we're able to make the shot. Really, really important. What happens with a medium speed, where you're in between, where you're not hitting super soft, but also not super hard? Well, what you have to understand is any shot there is on a pool table, there is always a kind of speed where you don't have to adjust when using side spin. Because, first of all, remember, with a soft shot, the cue ball makes a curve to the left. With a hard shot, the cue ball deflects to the right. And with a medium speed, both of those effects cancel each other out. This means in the beginning, the cue ball will deflect to the right, but then it will curve back and you will just be able to aim to your usual ghost ball point. So I'm trying to use that type of speed. Of course, it changes with the cue you're using. So let's use left spin, aim to our usual ghost ball point, and just adjust our speed that we are still able to make the shot even with side spin. This differs a bit or varies a bit with the distance, with the cue elevation. Remember, with more cue elevation, the cue ball will curve more. With more speed, the cue ball will deflect more and all that stuff. And this is basically everything you need to know about how to aim with side spin. And now I think it's a good time to introduce cue ball control. This is going to be very interesting. So you just started playing pool, and of course you want to make more balls in a row now. Well, I got your back, because I'll teach you one thing that makes a huge difference, and it will instantly boost your game. What I'm gonna show you in this video is that besides trying to make the ball, you can also control the cue ball in pool, and this is what actually this game is all about, besides trying to make the shot. So in this video I'm going to show you some very, very basic and easy things you can do to have the game a lot easier, and I guarantee this is gonna boost your game really a lot. It's not very difficult. We're just focusing on controlling the cue ball. And why is that? Well, if you watch carefully, I had very simple shots so far. And this is what cue ball control is all about. So in this video, I'm going to teach you some very basic concepts that will really help you with your game. Let's go. So let's start very, very simple and basic. And this is something you might already have heard of, because in pool, when you're having, for example, this straight shot here, what you can actually do is you can make the cue ball, you can see, stop right where it is. So this is actually the first way of controlling the cue ball. And all you have to do for that is you have to hit a bit lower on the cue ball. So you're not hitting the center of the cue ball. Usually you're probably trying to just hit the middle of the cue ball. But in that case, we're actually hitting a bit below center. you can see the cue ball stops just in place. What would happen if we hit high on the cue ball? Take a guess. So instead of hitting below center, I'm trying to hit as high as possible on the cue ball. And you can see that way the cue ball actually follows on a straight-in shot because the cue ball gets some forward rotation that makes the cue ball travel into that direction after contact. So far we hit a bit below center, we hit high. Then, of course, we can also hit low on the cue ball, so as low as possible. And what would happen here? The cue ball will actually come back. And the harder you're hitting, the further the cue ball will come back. So on this shot, for example, if I'm hitting low on the cue ball and I'm hitting really hard, you can see how the cue ball comes back all the way down table. Let's apply it in a real situation. So let's just assume this is the situation, right? So what could you do to get a nice position on the 8 ball? Well, if we look over, we can see if we just play a stop shot, then we have a very, very easy time to get on the 8. So in that case, just a stop shot gives me an almost straight-in shot on the 8 ball. What would you do here? Of course, now we don't want to play a stop shot because the 8 ball is here. So you should know it would be nice if the cue ball is here. So all I'm doing is I'm hitting high on the cue ball and the cue ball follows nicely towards the 8 ball. And once again, we have a very easy shot on the 8. And if the 8 ball would be here instead, well, of course, you already know it. Now you're gonna hit low on the cue ball and the cue ball comes back to the 8 ball. And once again, easy shot. So what would you do in this case? Of course, once again, you're hitting low, which is by the way called a draw shot, and you're hitting harder. You can see how nicely the cue ball comes down table. Everyone can make this 8 ball here. And you could do the same thing here. You can play that shot in and just draw the cue ball back. But if you have ball in hand, for example, you can make it a bit easier on yourself because drawing the cue ball is not so easy. So maybe in that situation, just giving yourself a bit of an angle, play high on the cue ball. And once again, this is the best kind of 8 ball you can have in this game. So far, we just had straight-in shots where you can follow, stop, or draw the cue ball back. But this time, the 8 ball is down table. So let's assume we have a shot with an angle here. So how does high, low, and a stop shot react then? Well, let's start very simple with a stop shot. Remember, a stop shot is when the cue ball would just stop after you made the object ball. But how would the cue ball react if you play the same kind of shot just with an angle? So the stroke is the same, the rotation is the same, you just have an angle. What happens then is the cue ball will follow the tangent line. And tangent line sounds very, very difficult, but it actually isn't difficult. All the tangent line is a 90-degree line. So let's imagine you're shooting the ball into here, into the pocket. You can see you have that 90-degree angle that the cue ball is gonna travel. And this is everything that you have to know about the tangent line. It's so simple. And it doesn't matter from where the cue ball is coming. The only thing that matters is you're shooting the ball into that direction. The 90-degree line, of course, is like this. So if I would play now a stop shot on that ball, where would the cue ball travel? Take a guess. You can see it just travels 90-degree down. And once again, we have a very, very easy shot on the 8 ball. Let's have some examples for that. In this example, we're shooting the 11 ball into here. So you can see the 90-degree line comes out like this. So if we just play a stop shot with the right speed, once again, we have a straight-in shot on the 8 ball. So very simple, isn't it? Let's imagine we're in this situation. So once again, we can use the tangent line to get a nice position. So ask yourself, if you're making a ball into here, what is the 90-degree line? Of course, the 90-degree line probably goes into that direction. So you can see if the cue ball travels to here and stops here, then we have a nice shot. So all you gotta take care of is to play it at the right speed. So let's play a stop shot. And once again, we have a straight-in shot on the 8 ball. Let's imagine we're in this situation right now. So you can see we have this shot and we want to get somewhere in this area for the 8 ball. So once again, we could use the tangent line because you have to understand. Here, we're shooting the ball into that direction. 90 degree is probably like this. And if we now follow the path, because we have the angle of incidence and reflection, so the cue ball comes out exactly how it bounced into the rail. I hope that makes sense. Then if we hit the right speed, the cue ball should stop here and we have a straight-in shot for the 8-ball. So let's give it a try. Remember, we're trying to play a stop shot. You can see it just travels 90 degrees down. And once again, we have a very, very easy shot on the 8-ball. Okay, let's get back to our previous example. So remember before, we were using the 90 degree line to come down table for the 8-ball. But what happens if the 8-ball is now exactly here, where the cue ball usually would travel with the 90 degree line? What can you do? Well, remember, we can also hit high and low on the cue ball. And if we're hitting low on the cue ball, remember, the cue ball comes back, with high it goes forward. And this is basically the same principle when we have a shot with an angle. Because now what you have to imagine is this is the 90 degree line. And if the cue ball comes back on a straight shot, it will also come back on an angled shot. So it will try to follow the line, but then the draw will bring the cue ball back to here because it has backwards rotation on it. So let's have a look at this. Instead of playing a stop shot, I'm gonna hit low on the cue ball to draw the cue ball a bit. And now the cue ball travels into this direction because it wants to go back, right? And of course, besides hitting low on the cue ball, what we can also do is, remember, we can hit high on the cue ball. So if we're hitting high, the cue ball wants to go forward. The cue ball wants to go into that direction. So instead of following the 90 degree line, it leaves into this direction. So let's play high on the cue ball and see what happens. You can see once again, a very, very good shot on the 8-ball. So how would you try to play this shot then if the 8-ball is down here? Remember, the first question you want to ask yourself is, where does the tangent line go? And if we create that 90 degree line, we can see that the tangent line pretty much goes to here. So let's try to play that. Play a stop shot. And the cue ball traveled a nice path, but however, we don't have a nice shot on the 8-ball this time, and the problem was we needed to hit harder that the cue ball actually stops here. So playing the shots at the right speed is also very, very crucial. Before I'm telling you more about that, let's put up the same shot and I'm gonna show you how you can make your life a bit easier on that one. So once again, remember, tangent line comes to here and here. Now imagine what happens if the cue ball instead comes to here and then to here. You can see if the cue ball is traveling along that line, we will have a straight-in shot on the 8-ball a very, very long time. So this was actually make more sense than trying to go this path, where this is the straight line, and the cue ball is completely crossing that straight line. Does that make sense? You can see straight line to the pocket, the cue ball comes from this angle, then we have a straight-in shot no matter where the cue ball stops. Compared to here, the cue ball stops here, no good, here it's good, and here it's already bad. So how can we bring the cue ball towards here? Well, remember, you can also hit low. And if we're hitting low, the cue ball wants to leave the tangent line into what direction? This is the tangent line. With low, the cue ball wants to leave into that direction. And then if we hit, I would say around here, then we have a nice position on the 8-ball. So let's give it a try. Let's hit low on the cue ball. And this is much better, this is much easier. Once again, we have a very good shot on the 8-ball. Now let's talk a bit about speed, and we probably should have covered that first because this is very, very crucial. This is already something that is so easily manageable to implement into your game. And I see it way too often. Let's say a player has this shot, he plays that one in, and he completely played the wrong speed because now we have no chance to make the 8-ball, right? So the first and only question, even if all of this stuff that I was telling you is over your head at this moment, at least ask yourself, what kind of speed do I want to hit? Even if you don't really know what's going to happen with the cue ball. You should have at least a rough idea if you're making that ball that the cue ball goes somewhere into this area. And then you just got to ask yourself, well, if I'm hitting soft, it will stop here. but if I'm hitting harder, I might have a chance that the cue ball ends up in a nice position for the 8 ball. So let's play the shot again, just with more speed. And you can see this way I have a much better chance to get an easy shot on the 8 ball. So playing at the right speed is very, very important. And for example, on our previous shot where we're trying to follow the tangent line, if we're hitting that ball too soft, then the cue ball still follows the tangent line, but it will never go down table. This is why it's so important to ask yourself, what is the right speed to play my shots? Next example, let's imagine you're having this shot here, and the cue ball, you should know that you're cutting it to the right, the cue ball goes to the left. So if I would hit that now very soft, and the cue ball goes away from the 8 ball. So you have to ask yourself, what will happen if I'm hitting the ball harder? So let's just imagine, and you can, as I mentioned, already do that if you have no idea what the cue ball does. At least you have an idea that the cue ball somehow travels into that direction. So if I just would decide to hit that one harder now, the cue ball has a very good chance to come from here all the way back to the 8 ball. And once again, this looks super awesome. The only thing I did was just hitting harder. And once again, you have a great shot on the 8 ball. All right, let's show you now how this would look combined with a complete 8 ball rack, 8 balls in a row. And I'm gonna talk you exactly through what I'm doing on each single shot. So now we already have a couple of tools to nicely control the cue ball, but now it's also about planning, because having the right plan is very, very important in pool. So let's assume our opponent scratched and we have ball in hand. Well, what I like to do is, when I'm playing 8 ball, I like to clear balls that are far away from the 8 ball, because it would be nice to have any shot that is close to the 8 ball as our last shot before we're playing the 8 ball. So here, what I'm imagining is, well, if I just play a stop shot on that one, I have a nice position on this one. So let's just play a stop shot. You know how to do that, by the way. Okay, now since we played this shot and we have this angle on the ball, what we want to ask ourselves is, well, what kind of speed do I want to play? You should have the rough idea that the cue ball goes somewhere to here. So if we're hitting too soft and leaving the cue ball here, this is no good. If you just think about where the cue ball would travel if we hit harder, you can see it travels to here, where we have a couple of options to either play this or this one into the side pocket. So just play it with the right speed. Not too soft, not too hard. And you can see how nicely the cue ball now traveled. So now we have the option to play this one or that one. I would say, because I'm planning my rackets, I want to play this one with a stop shot. So let's do that. Of course, I have to cue a bit over, just like that. Now if I'm going over to this one, I can see, well, if I'm playing another stop shot on this one, it is a bit difficult from further away. Then I don't have to do anything to get a position on that one. Now, do I want to play a stop shot on that one as well? Well, I could, because if I look to here with a stop shot, this is not ideal. This is also not ideal. So maybe I'm just gonna play a high ball and follow the cue ball a bit down. Okay? So high, not too hard. Just like that. And now I have a much easier shot on the 9 ball. And if I'm playing that 9 ball in, I don't want to hit too soft. I want to make the cue ball come out a bit off the rail for that 13 ball. So let's play that in. Now what I have to do is, well, it's not ideal. It's a bit far away. But once I'm playing a stop shot on that one, you can see I have a very makeable 8 ball. And yes, this could have been a bit easier, but I didn't want to talk about spin yet. Spin would have made that a bit easier, but this is a video that we're not gonna or a topic for the next video. Alright, I would say let's take another rack of 8 ball and try to clear the whole table just by learning how to control the speed. Cue ball control doesn't always have to be so complicated. Sometimes you don't need spin, draw or really anything fancy at all. Just getting the speed right will already change how easy or difficult the game feels. That's why I'll walk you through this 8 ball rack to show you how small stroke adjustments can make the cue ball stop exactly where you want it. The first ball we're gonna play in is that one. And when you're thinking about controlling the speed, the very first thing you have to think about is where is the cue ball gonna travel naturally if you're just hitting the center of the cue ball. And the good news is here we have a rough idea that the cue ball probably is gonna travel to here and then comes in between those two balls. And by knowing that, or by estimating the line, I can also decide where exactly the cue ball has to stop. Because you want to pick a point if you want to decide what speed you're going to play. This is important. So let's say if the cue ball travels to here, I would say in the best case, the cue ball stops around here, where we have this one into the side pocket, and a follow-up shot with this one, because we want to plan ahead. This is why we're going to change our speed, because we want to make the whole thing simple. So in that case, when I'm playing that shot, it's very important that I use the right bridge length, because for example, if I'm going all the way back to here with my bridge and I'm doing these kind of strokes, you can see, obviously this looks like I'm hitting way too hard. So we want to have a natural distance to the cue ball. This is important. So I would say these are the kind of strokes I want. And then I just want to stroke the cue ball naturally. Just a bit too hard, but we're still in a very good position on an 11 ball. Now, here comes a very important thing. You want to plan ahead, because obviously we're going to play the 11 into here, and then we're going to play that one into here, and then in the best case we have the 9 ball. But we have to think about the speed, because if we're just playing that ball in and bringing the cue ball to here, then we will end up straight on the 13 ball. And if we're straight, we can't bring the cue ball off the rail. So we gotta adjust our speed. So I would say we're just gonna play a center ball and a very, very soft speed that the cue ball stays off the rail, so that we get off the rail with the cue ball for the 9 ball. So here, once again, I'm not having those big strokes, but here, since I wanna play a very soft shot, you can see those tiny, tiny backswings that I'm doing. Just like that, and because of that, the cue ball didn't travel a lot and we have a very nice angle on the 13 ball. Now, let's get over. We know if we're playing just a center ball or maybe a follow shot where we're hitting high on the cue ball comes into the rail and should come out like this, where we are first of all off the rail with the cue ball and where we might have a tiny bit of an angle on the 9 ball so that we can decide what we want to do afterwards. So these are the kind of strokes I'm gonna make. And I want to follow through the cue ball as well. I don't want to just stop. I want to follow through, because this is part of my stroke and this is important for the cue ball to take a different path. Okay, this is perfect. Now we have 2 options here. First of all, we could roll it in really soft and probably bring the cue ball to here for the 12 ball. But once again, we want to think ahead, we want to plan ahead. And this is why this is so important in pool. You don't have to be a really good player, you can even be a total beginner. Planning ahead is something any one of you can do, and it will make the game so much easier. You don't have to improve your stroke, your aiming, your shot making, your fundamentals. Just by planning ahead, the game will become so much easier. So start from the very beginning to actually think about what you want to do on a table. And here, if I just decide to roll the ball in for the 12 ball, I have to somehow bring the cue ball to here for the 10 ball, and then from the 10 ball, I have to somehow bring the cue ball straight onto the 15 ball to play a stop shot for the 8 ball. And this is not easy, because here I have to manipulate the cue ball to bring it back, and then from here I once again have to manipulate the cue ball as well. So what we can do instead is maybe get from the 9 ball to the 10 ball, from the 10 ball to the 12 ball, and then we have a much easier time to get to the 15 ball, right? We're hitting the ball pretty full in the face, so the cue ball will lose a lot of its energy. So we have to hit a bit harder. The cue ball actually comes over to here for the 10 ball. And I even think about bringing the cue ball all the way frozen to the rail. So I even think about that tiny difference of cue ball placement, because if it's here on the rail, I can go over to the 12. If I'm straight, I will leave the cue ball on the rail. So even think about those tiny differences in cue ball control, because this will make a huge difference. So this is just a center ball. I, once again, could go to here, but I'm a bit too close in my opinion. So I'm going to the rail. By the way, this rail bridge is something I covered in my latest video. So I'm just gonna play a center ball with the right speed and bring the cue ball to the rail. You can see, even though I didn't bring the cue ball to the rail, the cue ball just bounced out a little bit. At least I have a clear plan in mind. So now I know I just hit this shot a bit too hard. If I would have not thought about it and the cue ball ends here, I would say, yes, this is fine. But now I know, well, I made a mistake because the cue ball should have been here. But it's still okay. We can still work with the cue ball because we have a tiny bit of an angle. So what do we want to do? Once again, think ahead, because if you're straight on the 12 ball, then you can't really do a lot and you will have a very, very long and difficult shot on the 15 ball. However, if I'm having a bit of an angle on the 12 ball, then I can just either use the tangent line to bring the cue ball out. We covered that as well in a previous video, or we can just play a follow shot, come into the rail and end up straight on the 15. Good news is in pool you can also cheat the pocket a bit. This means I'm gonna shoot the 10 ball into the right part of the pocket compared to here, and this makes the cue ball go a bit further to here. And I would say if I'm straight on the rail or almost straight on the rail, just a tiny bit of the rail, I will have a nice shot on the 12 ball. Okay, so once again, I'm gonna get very close with my bridge because I just wanna have the cue ball move a tiny, tiny bit here. Just like that, just a bit of the rail, and you will see in a minute, this makes the whole thing so much easier compared to being here. So once again, tiny bit of difference in cue ball placement makes a huge difference, makes the game so much easier. Okay, now we need a bit of a bigger stroke because now we know the cue ball once again is hitting the 12 ball pretty full, so it loses a lot of its own momentum that it gives to the 12 ball. This means we need to hit follow high on the cue ball to make the cue ball follow to here. And then I would say if we end up somewhere on that line, just probably around here, I would say, then we have a good shot on the 15 ball. I want to put a big stroke onto the ball. This is where I'm not getting so close, but a bit further away, maybe something like that. And then I just want to adjust my strokes, the length of my stroke and my follow through. Just like that. And we ended up almost straight on the 15 ball. So now we want to play a stop shot. This means the cue ball has no forwards rotation, it doesn't roll, no backwards rotation, you don't want to draw back, but it's just sliding. It gives 100% of its momentum to the 15 ball, and then we have the best possible 8 ball you can have in that game. So let's give that a try. I have to stroke it a bit harder because I want to keep the cue ball sliding when it arrives, so I can hit that as hard as I want as long as the cue ball is sliding. No backwards, no forwards rotation, then I will have a stop shot. So I'm gonna hit maximum low and I'm gonna hit the right speed that the cue ball slides on impact. You can see now I had a bit of draw on the cue ball. This means I hit a bit too hard, but this is fine. We still have a good shot on the 8 ball. And you can see how simple we made that whole rack look just by using the proper speed and just by thinking ahead, by planning ahead how you want to run this rack and by understanding what kind of angle you need. And now let's have a final look at 5 common shots most amateurs are playing wrong. In this video I'm going to show 5 common shots that most amateurs play wrong and how to play them properly. Let's start with the first situation. Ball in hand and you need to get from the 1 to the 8. A few years ago I would have given myself a straight-in shot and just draw the cue ball back for position. But so often I just played a stop shot instead, and sometimes for whatever reason I overdrew the cue ball by a mile. But even nowadays I wouldn't play it that way anymore, because it is a shot that requires a perfectly timed amount of backspin. And in pool, not only amateurs, but even the pros wanna avoid touchy shots. This is one because it requires a soft draw stroke. So instead, just use a bit more angle and stun the cue ball into the long rail. This is the most common shot there is in pool for a reason. It's even much easier to control. Instead of a draw, you just need a sliding cue ball. That makes it 10 times easier. The next shot I always played wrong was this one, where I just wanna go one rail to the 8 ball. Pretty simple, right? Of course I tried to cut the ball and just play a follow shot. But I ended up way too far away from the 8, and that's why I thought, well, let's just hit it a bit harder. And all of a sudden I ended up even further away from the 8. So I asked myself, why is that? Well, follow on the cue ball naturally keeps it moving in the direction you're shooting. This means the cue ball wants to keep going towards the corner pocket even after it makes contact with a rail. And the harder I hit, the more follow on the cue ball. That's why it wants to go even more to the rail. To avoid that, I just play a center ball that is rolling instead of spinning. That's the only change. Now I can hit softer and the cue ball is controlled by the cutting angle. And you can pick whatever angle you want because pocket hangers can be cut into any direction. This means even if the 8 ball was way up table, I just cut the ball more so the cue ball will have more momentum left and takes a different path. When I was in this situation, which is awfully tricky, I used a lot of right spin to get to the 8. And I ended up with the perfect position on the 8. It's a great shot, yes, but was it the right shot? Well, remember, we want to make the game easier, and using spin on this shot is very difficult to judge. Most of the time you miss by overcutting the ball, because spin makes the cue ball deflect. So instead, I try to see what happens if I just use follow instead of spin. And surprisingly, I got a great position on the 8. If you compare the path of inside spin to the path of just follow, there is a clear difference though. So what if the follow path is blocked by an interfering ball, for example? Well, then I just use a bit less follow. Now the path is very similar to the one with spin. One reason is that the cue ball automatically gets a bit of right spin from the one ball and every single rail. Sounds complicated, makes total sense, but is a bit too deep for this video though. If you're interested, the bonus video for that is in the video description. This time I need to get from the 2 to the 1 to the 8, so I just play the 2 ball in, of course, and 2 straight. So now I'm forced to play a hard stun shot with left spin, which is very uncontrolled. So let's just try again. This time I ended up even more straight and a big draw stroke is required, which is very difficult once again. why didn't I just take the time to actually look at the angle I need on the one before playing the goddamn shot? That made me realize the cue ball has to bounce much further off the rail. I know, this looks like a lot of angle, but on this shot, you don't have to do anything with the cue ball. You can use your absolute feel-good stroke to come up table. And I totally get if you're afraid of that shot or even worried about getting that position on the one. So you could also try to hold the cue ball below the one. It's a bit risky, you are more likely to miss the two ball. However, if it works, you have a ball in hand position on the one, it's easier to pocket and position is as natural as it gets. The last one is a big one. Here I was close to straight on the one and I just want to play a stop shot to hold position on the 8. Let's hit a bit harder to bring the cue ball just a bit off the rail to make the 8 ball easier. And the 1 ball hang in the pocket. What was the problem? Well, this was shot way too hard, which makes the pockets play smaller. I barely hit the rail before the pocket and missed the shot. So hitting hard makes pockets smaller, and very often you'll also tighten up on the stroke, which can cause you to miss the shot just completely. And it can also create inaccuracy in your cue ball's tip position. And even if you get everything of that right, if you don't hit the pocket where you intend, all of the risk was for nothing. So is all of this really worth the risk to just bring the cue ball a bit off the rail? Well, I don't think so. Instead, I aim maximum low on the cue ball and just play a relaxed, soft stop shot. This means more accuracy, it makes the pocket bigger, and the cue ball still got off the rail that way. So what do you think? Do you want to start playing the shots the right way? Let me know in the comments, like and subscribe for more.